The attic smelled of dust and time, thick enough to taste like old bones and forgotten letters. I turned the pocket watch over in my palm, its brass casing cold as a dead river stone. The 1920s engraving on the back, Hoffman and Son, timekeepers, felt like a lie. I'd inherited this house, this attic, this watch, and the crushing weight of a life spent chasing ghosts. The watch's mechanism was stiff, gears grinding like teeth in a tomb. I held it to the tarnished mirror above the moth. Eaten chaise longue, the glass clouded with decades of neglect. I pressed the crown. 5 seconds. I counted them in my head. Have I known? 2, 3, 4, 5. The mirror showed my reflection mid-blink, eyes locked in a silent scream, frozen like a fly in amber. No movement, no breath. Just the hollow terror in my own eyes, trapped in glass. The air grew unnaturally still. Not just quiet, absent-tubby. The birds had stopped singing, the insects had ceased their buzzing, the world had held its breath. Then I noticed the color. The faded crimson of the wallpaper bled into gray, the green of the velvet chair leaching into ash. Everything was losing its saturation, as if the world was being erased from the inside out. My skin felt cold, clammy, the way it did before a fever. The cat perched on the dusty window ledge, shifted. Its fur iridescent as a beetle, a shell shimmered under the single shaft of weak afternoon light. It purred, not the soft rumble of a contented animal, but a subsonic thrum that vibrated through the floorboards, a submerged engine deep in the earth. It resonated in my molars, a low metallic hum that made the dust motes in the air tremble. This is wrong, I thought. The resignation settling deeper. This is how it ends, not with a bang but with silence and a frozen face. Asterisk, I dropped the watch. It hit the floor with a sharp flack-clack, then the mirror shattered. Not into shards, but into a single, perfect cube, hovering an inch above the floorboards. The glass was flawless, reflecting the attic's decayed beauty without distortion. I stared into it. My own face stared back, but the reflection wasn't tea-frozen. It was smiling, a slow, deliberate curve of the lips, utterly alien. The smile didn't tea-match my own frozen, terrified expression. It was a smile of knowing of something ancient and hungry. The cube tilted slightly, the reflection's smile widening, the edges of its eyes crinkling with a mockery of joy. The cat's purr intensified, the sound now a deep, wet vibration that seemed to pull at the very fabric of the room. The color drained completely from the world. The attic became a monochrome dream of gray and black, the Gothic Midnight palette stripped bare. The smile in the cube's glass didn't move, did blink, didn't breathe. It just what was suited. And it was smiling at me. I stood there, the watch forgotten on the floor, the silence pressing in like a physical weight. The cube reflected my face, but it smiled. The attic was a symphony of silence, the cat's purr now an ominous bass line that seemed to resonate in my very marrow. I approached it cautiously, as if any sudden movement might shatter this fragile tableau into chaos. Its iridescent fur, once gleaming like a beetle, a shell under the dim light, was now sun-bleached bone, white, absorbing all color until it appeared almost translucent. The cat didn't move when I reached out to touch its flank. It felt cold and brittle beneath my fingertips, like dried leaves ready to crumble at the slightest pressure. Up close, the purr wasn't so much a sound as a vibration, a subsonic thrum that made the dust motes in the air tremble. I grasped one of the small screws securing its underside panel. It protested with a metallic rasp, like fingernails on slate, before giving way with an abrupt t-farty. The panel came off easily, revealing a micro-drone housing within. No cat guts or machinery here, just smooth black metal and glowing green lights, embedded in the drone. Center was a lens, pulsing softly with that same deep purple light I'd seen bleeding from the walls earlier. It seemed to throb in time with my heartbeat, a macabre synchronization that sent an involuntary shiver down my spine. I reached for it, expecting resistance or some form of deterrent. But there was none. The lens came free with barely any effort, leaving behind only smooth metal and the humming green lights. As I held it up to examine under the light, something caught my eye, an inscription etched into its side, "Interviewer." The drone's core thrummed in my palm like a heartbeat gone awry. It felt heavy, wrong somehow, as if its very presence was bending reality around us. The lens seemed to stare back at me, accusing almost before the green lights flickered and died. Suddenly, the cat moved. its head twisted sharply towards me, eyes reflecting that same accusatory glare. Then it lunged. Not at me, but at my hand holding the lens. I pulled away just in time as its jaws snapped shut where my fingers had been mere milliseconds ago. The force of the missed attack sent the lens flying from my grasp. It spun through the air like a miniature planet gone astray before embedding itself into my left palm with an abrupt, wet click. Pain exploded along my nerves, sharp and insistent as it dug deep into flesh and bone. I stared down at my hand in disbelief, watching blood well around the lens, circumference. Then I noticed something else. The cat's fur was changing color again, absorbing the crimson of my blood until only sun. Bleached bone remained once more. A timestamp projected onto the attic wall from somewhere within the drone, *0 hours 0 minutes and 0 seconds *. It hung there for a moment before flickering and disappearing. Then silence, absolute oppressive, and darkness that seemed to bleed into every corner of my vision, until all I could see was that deep purple light reflecting in the cat's eyes. And then, nothing. The ink bled from the pen like a wound opening in the page. It pooled in a dark, viscous pool before spreading outward in slow, deliberate waves, neither liquid nor solid, but something in between, something that felt like a memory trying to escape. The 1920's research log lay open on the attic floor, its leather, bound spine cracked and brittle. My hand hovered above it, the pen still gripped in my fingers, the tip now dry and useless. I stared at the ink as it seeped into the paper, dissolving the words I had written into a monochrome wash of shadow and absence. The attic was no longer a place but a void, its edges swallowed by the ink, slow consuming advance. The faded wallpaper, once a patchwork of sepia tones and muted grays, had lost all color entirely. It was now a featureless expanse of black, as if the house had been drained of life and left only the husk of its walls. The silence pressed against my ears like a second skin, the kind that never let go. It was not the silence of absence but of expectation, of something waiting, something watching. The drone's purr had changed. It no longer sounded like a cat but like a machine, a low, wet rasp that slithered through the air like a serpent shedding its skin. I traced the ink's pattern with my eyes, watching as it formed a perfect circle, the same shape that had been etched into the inside of my watch. It was not just a shape, it was a mechanism, a design that seemed to pulse with a rhythm I could not quite place. My fingers twitched, and I reached for the watch at my wrist, its face now dark and unresponsive, its hands frozen in an eternal, meaningless moment. The ink continued to spread, and with it came the sensation of being pulled inward, as if the attic itself was collapsing into the page. The air smelled of old paper and something else, something metallic, something sharp and cold. I could not tell if it was the ink or my own breath that carried the scent. My vision blurred, and for a moment I thought I saw my own reflection in the wall. But it was not me. It was something else, something that moved when I did not. Something that watched me with the same hollow, unblinking stare as the drone. Then the ink stopped. It formed a perfect circle, a doorway, and the air behind it shimmered like heat rising from asphalt. I took a step forward, my boots crunching against the attic floor, and the ink bled outward again, forming a path that led directly into the wall. The silence deepened, and the drone's purr became a low, wet sound, like the slow drip of water into a well. I stared at the doorway, my breath shallow, my pulse a distant echo in the vast, empty space of my skull. The attic had become a theater of shadows, each one a silhouette of my own face, twisted and wrong. I clutched the pocket watch in my palm, its surface slick with condensation, its hands frozen in a cruel, unchanging moment. I pressed the button. Time fractured, the world held its breath, and for 5 seconds the shadows were still. I moved like a ghost through the suspended air, my boots making no sound, my breath a phantom in my lungs. The claw hammer in my grip felt heavier than it should, its iron head cold and unyielding. I raised it, my arm a pendulum, and brought it down with a force that felt like breaking the surface of a frozen lake. The shadow's limb shattered like brittle glass, its edges curling inward, dissolving into nothingness. The air tasted of compressed air, of something artificial and sterile, like the inside of a canister. I stared at the space where the limb had been, and for a moment I thought I saw a flicker of movement, a pulse, a heartbeat, something that did not belong to me. The world snapped back into motion. The drone's purr had grown louder, now a subsonic thrum that vibrated in my bones, in the marrow of my teeth. I staggered, my vision swimming, and the shadows reassembled themselves. But something was wrong. One of them, my own reflection, had a limb that was not shadow but flesh, My own hand, my own wrist, my own blood, oozing from the wound. It moved, twitching, as if it had a will of its own. I stepped back, my heart hammering, my breath shallow. The air was thick with something I could not name, a weight that pressed against my chest, my throat, my mind. I looked at my hand, then at the shadow, and I saw the truth. The shadows were not separate from me. They were me, fractured, splintered pieces of my own soul torn loose and given form. I could feel them pulling at me, at my edges, at my seams, trying to take me apart. I pressed the button again. Time froze. I moved, not with purpose, but with inevitability, my body a marionette controlled by something I could not see. I raised the hammer again, but this time I did not strike the shadow. The blow was silent, the impact felt in my bones, in the hollows of my chest. The shadow reassembled itself, but now it had my hand, my flesh, my blood. The drone's purr rose to a crescendo, a sound that was not sound at all, but a vibration that made my teeth ache, my ears bleed. I stared at my reflection in the wall, and for the first time I saw it clearly. It was not just a reflection. It was a mirror, and in it I saw not my face but something else. Something watching, something waiting. And then the reflection raised its hand, the one I had sliced, and it moved toward me. The tablet's screen flickered, a digital spasm that made my heart lurch and sink. I'd meant to delete the corrupted log, but instead it seemed to have glitched back into existence. My reflection stared at me from the black glass, eyes wide and static-filled. Error, ancestral timeline corrupted, it repeated, voice distorted like a bad radio transmission. Target, Hoffman. Sefton. I reached out, fingers brushing against my image on the screen. The air around me seemed to thicken in response, charged with an unseen energy that made the hairs on my arms stand at attention. The drone's purr rose again, its volume increasing exponentially until it felt like a physical force pushing against my eardrums, vibrating in my bones. I could feel it in my teeth, in the back of my throat, resonating through every cavity and hollow space within me. I turned to face the source, expecting to see the cat beetle's iridescent fur glinting under the attic's dim light, but found only empty floorboards. My gaze landed instead on a wall, its surface textured like sun-bleached bone beneath my fingertips. I pressed harder, digging into the grooves with my nails. The texture seemed to shift under my touch, pulsing subtly as if alive. The drone's hum reached another crescendo, and in that moment of peak intensity, something happened. Something gave way. The wall breathed out a sigh of cold dampness, its surface peeling away like dead skin, revealing the face beneath. My own reflection staring back at me with hollow eyes and static-filled mouth, repeating my name over and over again. Hoffman, Hoffman. In the attic's sudden silence, my breath echoed like a rhythmic drumbeat in my ears. The cat beetle had stopped its purring, or rather, it had transformed into something far more unsettling. An engine's roar, drowning out all other sound. It was as if we were underwater, surrounded by the muffled thrum of some unseen machine. I looked down at the watch in my hand, its face now a storm of swirling numbers. They pulsed and writhed like worms on hot asphalt, accelerating so rapidly that they blurred into an unreadable mess. I felt a corresponding acceleration within me, a queasy lurching sensation deep in my gut, as if something fundamental was being torn apart at the seams. My gaze flicked up to the book, teetering on the edge of its shelf above. It seemed to have grown heavier, darker, like an anchor threatening to plunge into the abyss below. I raised the watch towards it, fingers trembling with a strange anticipation or dread. I couldn't tell which anymore. I activated the timepiece's mechanism, and for a moment, nothing happened. Then, ever so slowly at first, then gathering speed until it seemed like a bullet train, the book began to accelerate backwards along its shelf. Its pages flipped in reverse, each one snapping open with an audible pop that reverberated through the room like gunshots. But instead of freezing mid-air as I'd expected, the book vanished completely. One moment it was there, hurtling towards me at breakneck speed. The next, nothing but empty shelf and dust motes dancing in the gloom. Panic surged within me, a tidal wave threatening to drown out rational thought. But beneath that churning sea of fear, something else stirred, something coldly analytical, calculating. This wasn't merely halting time anymore. This was accelerating it locally. The watch hadn't just frozen the book in place, but had sent it spinning backwards through its own timeline. Beetle's engine-like purr reached another crescendo, vibrating through my bones until they felt like they might shatter into 1,000 pieces. And then, as suddenly as if someone had thrown a switch, everything went still again. But this time there was no silence. Instead, an eerie wind began to whisper around us, carrying with it the scent of decaying leaves. I looked down at Beetle's fur, once iridescent like oil slicks under sunlight, now monochrome and dull as if someone had bleached all color from its coat. It seemed fitting somehow, that loss of vibrancy, that sudden draining of life, but I couldn't quite understand why until my gaze landed on the wall behind it. The surface pulsed subtly, breathing out cold dampness like a living thing exhaling through pores made of sun-bleached bone. As I watched, horrified fascination rooting me to the spot, those pores began to open wider and wider until they formed two hollows that were unmistakably eye sockets staring back at me. And then came the face beneath, the reflection from earlier but now twisted into something monstrous, its mouth filled with rows upon rows of jagged teeth like broken glass. The eyes blinked once to wet parchment, tears cracking open to reveal milky orbs, and I knew without doubt that this was no mere doppelganger staring back at me. This was my own face, warped and twisted by something ancient and evil dwelling within the very heart of this house. I knelt before the floorboards, my fingers tracing the grain of the wood as if it might tell me a secret. The attic had always been silent, but now it felt like it was holding its breath, waiting. My hands pressed into the planks, and with a groan that echoed like a trapped animal, the wood gave way. Beneath it, wrapped in a cloth of faded crimson, lay the knife. Its hilt was carved from bone, smooth and cold, and the blade gleamed with a sheen that looked like it had been forged from the moon itself. The same circular pattern that had haunted me in the ink of the watch, and the shifting numbers on its face was etched into the blade, twisting, spiraling, a vortex of meaning I could not yet comprehend. I reached for it, my fingers trembling as they closed around the hilt. The moment I touched it, the walls of the attic began to vibrate, not with sound, but with something deeper, a subsonic thrum that pressed against my chest like a living thing. My breath caught in my throat as the drones purr, that engine-like vibration sync with the knife's hum, as if they were two halves of the same machine. The air thickened around me, pressing in like a vice. I turned toward the mirror that hung in the corner, its surface now dull and lifeless, but as I stepped closer I saw my reflection. No, not my reflection. It was me, but not me. The figure in the glass held the knife, its hand steady, its face blank. The expression was not mine, but something older, something that had been waiting. The silence in the attic was no longer a silence, it was a presence, a weight that pressed against my skull, thick as wet parchment. The reflection's grip on the knife tightened, and for a moment I thought I saw the blade shimmer as if it were made of something that did not belong to this world. My own hand twitched, but I could not move. The drone's purr grew louder, vibrating through my bones, and the knife's hum rose in pitch, until it was a sound that felt like it was being pressed into my ears, drilling into my mind. And then, as suddenly as it had begun, the reflection dropped the knife. It fell to the floor with a soft metallic clatter, and the hum ceased. The silence returned, but it was no longer thick. It was hollow, empty like the space between heartbeats. My breath came in shallow gasps, and I stared at the mirror, my own face staring back at me, pale and unblinking. The drone's purr had stopped. The knife lay on the floor still, and I was alone. I stared at the wallpaper, my breath shallow, my pulse a distant drumbeat in my ears. There, in the pattern of the old floral design, was a face. No, not a face, but a gaze, a set of eyes that had not blinked in centuries. They were the eyes of something older, something that had not been born but had simply 40 been 14 watching from the edges of time. My own reflection had vanished, replaced by this thing, this ancient woodland deity, its gaze fixed on me, unblinking, unflinching. The air around me was thick, not with dust, but with something else. Something that pressed against my skin like a second layer of flesh. My fingers twitched at my sides, useless, as if I had forgotten how to move. The walls of the attic, once solid, now seemed to pulse, to breathe, their surfaces rippling like disturbed water. I could hear the sound of something vast and slow, like the groan of a ship, as hull under a storm, but it was not a sound. It was a from presence, a vibration that I could feel in my teeth, in the marrow of my bones. The cat sat on the floor, its iridescent fur catching the dim light like oil on water. It was silent, watching me, its eyes reflecting nothing. I wanted to reach for it, to feel something shrid really bide. But the moment I moved, the world shifted. The attic floor, once wooden, was now a patchwork of moss and roots, as if the forest had burrowed its way up from below. The air smelled of damp earth and something else, something sweet and cloying like the scent of rotting fruit left in the sun. And then, from the corner of my eye, I saw it, the timestamp. It hovered in the air, a string of numbers flickering like a broken light. Asterisk 0 hours 0 minutes and 0 seconds asterisk. It pulsed, and with each beat, the world around me seemed to glitch. The walls bled color, the floor writhed, and the cat's purr. No, not a purr, But something else, something twine mechanical, like the low, grinding hum of an engine buried deep in the earth, vibrated through me, through the air, through the very fabric of the attic. The forest whispered my name, not in words, but in the rustling of leaves, the creak of branches, the hush of something vast and unknowable pressing in from all sides. I could not move, could not speak, could not even breathe without feeling the weight of the moment pressing down on me. The timestamp pulsed again, and the whisper grew louder, deeper, until I was no longer Sebastian Hoffman, but something else, something that had been waiting, watching, and now, finally quanting the forest to foster my name. I ran, but the forest did not move. It watched, it waited. My boots struck the earth, but the ground was not earth. It was a mirror, a sheet of polished obsidian that reflected me back, not as I was, but as I had been, as I would be again and again forever. My breath came in short, ragged gasps, but the air was thick, not with dust or decay, but with something heavier, something that clung to my lungs like a second skin. The cat was behind me, its purr a low, mechanical thrum that vibrated through the marrow of my bones, a sound that was not a sound at all, but a presence, a force pressing against my back, urging me forward, or perhaps holding me in place. The trees stood in perfect symmetry, their trunks smooth and unblemished, their branches extending in rigid, unnatural angles. Each one was a mirror, each one reflecting me, but not just me. My every motion, my every flicker of panic, my every trembling breath. I stumbled, my hands clawing at the bark, but the trees did not yield. My reflection in the nearest one mimicked my movements exactly, down to the tremor in my hands, the way my jaw clenched, the way my eyes darted from one direction to another, searching for an escape that did not exist. The silence was suffocating. Not the silence of an empty room, but the silence of something that had been waiting, something that had been watching, something that had been furtive long before I arrived. It was the silence of a world that had forgotten how to speak, how to move, how to breathe. The only sound was the drone's purr, that low, grinding hum that vibrated through the air like the engine of a machine buried deep beneath the earth. A sound that was not a sound but a for-presencer, a thorsai. I turned, my reflection turning with me, and saw the house in the distance. It was no longer the house I had left. It was something else, something older, something that had been waiting for me. For this moment, for this loop. My reflection stepped forward, mimicking my movements, and with each step, the forest seemed to shift, the trees bending slightly, as if they were not trees at all, but something else, something watching, something waiting. The door to the attic was there just as I had left it, but it was open. My reflection stepped through, and I followed, my body moving as if it were not mine, as if I were not 20 Mai, but something else, something that had been waiting, watching, and now, finally fuggening. The watch felt cold against my skin, a dead weight where my heart should be. I held it too long, let the brass edges bite into my palm. The attic air tasted like dry parchment and forgotten dust, but the colors were gone. The cobwebbed rafters, the moth-eaten velvet chair, even the rust stain on the floorboard, everything had bled into the same flat monochrome gray. No shadows, no depth, just the suffocating absence of hue. The silence wasn't empty. It was thick, viscous, like the sound of rowing oars dragging through bone. Thud, thud, scrape, thud, scrape. Asterisk each drag a slow, deliberate scrape against the marrow of my skull. I'd heard it before, in the forest, but now it was the only sound in the world. The drone cat, its iridescent fur now dull as tarnished silver, detached from my shoulder with a soft fit hiss. Click. It hovered for a second, a tiny perfect sphere of dead light, then projected asterisk 0 hours 0 minutes and 0 seconds asterisk into the air. The number hung there sharp and clean, then dissolved like smoke. The house didn't groan or creak. It folded. Walls slid inward like a collapsing map, the wooden floorboards warping, bending, pulling the space into a single, impossible point. The attic ceiling vanished, replaced by the endless mirrored forest to run through. But this time, the forest wasn't watching. It was Sivant CD me. I looked down. My reflection was gone, not obscured, not hidden. It had simply ceased to exist. The polished floor where I stood was now a perfect featureless mirror, reflecting only the monochrome void above. The pocket watch in my hand was empty. The glass was clouded, the hands frozen at asterisk 0 hours 0 minutes and 0 seconds asterisk. ID tried to stop the cycle, to hold back the endless repetition. ID been so certain the watch was a weapon, a key. It was just a clock, a reminder of the stain, my life, a single, unchanging loop of motion and dread. The resignation wasn't a feeling, it was the air I breathed. I'd been waiting for this moment, this absolute stillness, since the forest first began to watch. The silence deepened. The furthered, scraped of the oars now a physical pressure against my eardrums. It wasn't just sound, it was the sound of the world folding in on itself, the sound of time itself unraveling. The attic floor beneath my feet began to ripple, not like water, but like a sheet of glass cracking under impossible weight. The grain of the wood dissolved, replaced by the cold, seamless surface of a mirror. I felt no fear, only the chilling certainty of the inevitable. The floor wasn't unfolding. It was city becoming the forest. The mirrors wouldn't reflect me this time. They hold the emptiness I always carried inside. I didn't move. I couldn't. The attic floor beneath me was no longer wood. It was the first mirror of the forest, smooth and unyielding, stretching out in every direction, reflecting only the endless, colorless sky. The silence pressed in, a final heavy drag of oars through bone, and then the floor unfurled into the forest of mirrors.